Canoe Trails started in 1951, and the way it got started was the Scout Executive Fort McIntosh District. Doc Partridge had been the Scoutmaster in Troop 406, and he was the one that took us camping. And the Scout Executive found out that Doc had been taking older boys in Troop 406 up to Canada, canoe trips. And so the Fort Mac executive asked Doc if he could open it up for the district. And he did. That was in 1951, and it started. And the training was pretty much the same. You had to have the canoeing merit badge, all the requirements for that. You had to have the swimming merit badge, and we took all the training. And that year there were 2 trips to Canada, to Kippawa. One trip was 406, and the other trip was a Troop 488 from Vanport. The Explorer program was just starting, and so Vanport was Troop 488 at that point. And we had basically no equipment. Doc Partridge, he'd made a commissary box out of an orange crate. He wanted to keep, to keep it very inexpensive so everybody would have a chance to go. So he had made this commissary box out of an orange crate. He'd made his own tent, and he carried the commissary box with a tump line, and then he had a little duffel bag he put on top of it for his equipment. The rest of us just went with our own single pack and our own tent. I think there was one fellow that had a jungle hammock. I noticed you mentioned hammocks. Are you still using hammocks a little bit? Yeah, there's one fellow that had a hammock.
How'd you carry the food?
Actually, we carried the food in cardboard boxes at Fresh.
So good cardboard.
You really didn't have any equipment.
And we were so fortunate that the weather was good. We started right off from the town of Kippawa. At that point, there was no electric, and I know, if you're looking out over up Kippawa Lake there's a big rock on the left. There's a great big barn type structure there, and that was their ice house. So we started off right from Kippawa, and Doc was the only one he had the map. He was the only one that knew where we were going, and he only had.
You had to take good care of him, I guess.
Oh, yeah. He was a wonderful guy. Yeah. He was working for Calgon up in Pittsburgh, commuted on a train, and he was a chemical engineer, and his specialty was water, and he invented that. I don't know if you ever remember or not, but they used to have little Calgon box of water softening stuff, and he invented that. Had a patent on it, and so we only had I think one portage. We went across had to go make 2 trips, 2 portages. I think made 2 trips across a portage. Let's see.
What kind of canoes did you have?
Well, Doc had a Grumman canoe, 17-foot Grumman lightweight canoe, and I think Chuck Grant, he had a canoe. I had a canoe.
How old were you at the time again?
I was 15.
You were 15, you had your own canoe.
Yeah. Well, when Doc had that canoe, and I wanted one also. So my grandfather said, well, he said, if you save half the money, he said, I'll give you the other half.
How much did it cost you?
$200. And I think he was a little bit surprised because I think he thought, well, you could buy an old wooden canvas canoe for like $50 or something like that. When I said, no, it's 200, but buddy, he helped me out with it.
He's like, don't.
Yeah, let's see. Well, first of all, I'll tell you how much it cost. It cost $25.
Wow.
And we got a $3 refund. And that included a fishing license. And listen to your trip. He would be so pleased that you had such a great trip. You covered all that territory, and that you had so much fun too. I was just blown away by hearing about your trip. It's just absolutely wonderful. Let's see. One story that I heard, I wasn't on this trip, but back when Doc was back in the 50s, they started the trip, and they got right at the beginning of the trip, they got the splashing out with paddles and carrying on, and turned over a couple canoes and lost a lot of their food, a good part of their food. So,
Did you tie the cardboard boxes into the canoes?
no, we didn't.
I think that started the year they lost a lot of their food.
Yeah, that started later. So they got the Hunter's Point, and of course there's a little store there at Hunter's Point, like there maybe still is. I don't know. The last time I was there, that store was still there. But anyhow, he wouldn't let anybody out of the canoe. He went into the store, and the only thing he bought was toilet paper.
Oh.
Come back, they took off, and they were doing a lot of fishing and a lot of berry picking.
What were some of the meals that you guys had?
Fish
Like
and berries.
whenever, besides fish and berries.
Well, I think it was,
Like what was your what did you ration? What were your rations?
I think it was about the same. I remember one meal where we fished for lake trout. We caught a great big lake trout, and he had a reflector oven as part of that commissary box. And we made up some noodles and put that lake trout in there and baked them in the. Breakfast was it was usually oatmeal, slab bacon, which was. Did you guys ever use slab bacon?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was kind of ugly, that slab bacon.
We had, was it 20 pounds of bacon on this trip?
Is that right?
Where's Pat?
We didn't buy a slab though.
Did you pre-cook?
Not this time.
Pre-cook.
Okay.
Well, the slab bacon, yeah, we'd cut the stuff up and cook it. And we'd end up just with a few little pieces of bacon apiece and about 3 quarts of grease. And then it got a little better when they bought it sliced, slab bacon sliced. But I was also on the senior Canoe Trails with John Aiken, and we made a big improvement when we got the pre-cooked bacon. That was, you only have to heat it up for about 30 seconds. That was a good thing to take.
And it saves a lot of weight, unnecessary transport.
Oh yeah. Then I got back into the Canoe Trails around 1970 as an adult, and I was in the post, and was in it for about 5 or 6 years. on some co-ed trips and so on. And then I got back into it again with John Aiken on the senior trip, and we took quite a few trips in the 90s. So.
Now, what was the average age in Mr. Akins' group? Say 70?
Yeah.
Late 60s maybe?
Yeah, when I got in with them, most of us were retired by that time. Yeah, most retired. Yeah. We weren't taking real tough trips, and we used propane stoves. Do you guys use propane? You still cooking on wood?
Brian, do you and Nate remember Mr. Akins' group? Like when you guys were in as kids?
I remember the name.
They referred to it as G group all the time, and they were pretty much the whole group was retired, and usually they'd recruit a couple young guys, somebody like Andrew that
could do all the
do
work.
some of the pool. Yeah, they try to get one or two guys from the post,
Yeah.
or
Well, we
that
needed
would
somebody
lay
to
over and go back out another week with them, and
build a great big campfire and so on and so forth. We did a young guy to do that.
I can remember, as a kid and a young adult, you guys all being old. I'm now in my 50s, and what it feels like to get through that week at my age, I can't imagine.
I'm still old.
Hesitation.
These guys were 65 and 70 years old, and you guys did at 14 and 15, and I just think that's really impressive.
Yeah, it's definitely.
Well, we took some
mind-blowing,
pretty good trips, with a lot of portages and stuff. I don't think we ever covered 100 miles like you guys did on this last trip. But then as we got older and older, we'd just go someplace like down to Sayers or up to Turtle and set up a base camp and take day trips. So I guess that's about it, unless somebody has some more questions.
Did you three-man paddle a lot in the boys groups?
Yeah, we were mostly 3-man. Yeah. Then we had later on we had those great big three-man packs. 3 people with sleeping bags in one pack and a food pack.
So the initial trips, everyone kind of cooked their own food?
No.
You cooked as a group?
Group cooking. Yeah.
But they carried their own equipment.
Yeah, everybody carried their individual pack with their tent and sleeping
Each of you
bags.
had your own tent?
Yeah, right, yeah. But, it didn't take long for the Canoe Trails really to develop very good ways of traveling.
After losing food and
With
figuring out things,
Yeah, all the importance.
cardboard.
Was your clothing role specific too? Like, did you guys use the army pants and red and blacks, or did you wear boots? Did you have tennis shoes? Like,
we
Life
had
preservers?
no life preservers. In fact, they were very upset when they had to start using life preservers. Back in the 60s, I guess it was required. And I heard one story that they were up on the Allegheny River, and a canoe turned over, and there was a barge, and a couple kids got swept underneath this barge. And they said, well, if it had a life preserver, he'd probably never gotten out of there. They said the canoe is your life preserver. You stay with the canoe.
did you guys wear boots or tennis shoes or what?
Yeah, we wore boots,
Boots?
except one man, he wanted to wear tennis shoes. He wouldn't wear boots. And he said, well, if I get these tennis shoes wet, by the time I cross the portage, they've dried out, and you guys in these boots ever wet for the whole week?
Did he break his ankle, that guy?
No, he didn't. Well, he was an adult, you know, he was careful.
Now, when did the Braves start, you know?
I don't know. I don't know. When when I got back into it in the 70s, of course, you know what it was like then. They used the berets. And, you know, at that point, I think Dr. Patrick wasn't on the first trip. But he came in pretty soon after that. And I think he and Mr. Wildman were the ones that started the co-ed part of it. It was not co-ed up to that point. But by 1970 it was.
Yeah, I think 65, Mrs. Wallman told me, was the first girls' trip.
Yeah.
What was the feeling about that? Did you guys, did people resist the girls joining the program?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it was a big boost for the program. You get the girls, and that attracts a lot more boys. And the girls just loved that program because it was something that they felt so proud of themselves that they were able to carry the canoe and do this stuff, and the girls just absolutely loved it.
What kind of doctor was Dr. Patrick?
He was a urologist.
Yeah, his son
Okay.
is the one that's a doctor now,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
they're talking about Dr. Patrick Senior.
Right. Yeah. Well, they were both urologists.
Yeah.
But like I say, you know, Doc Partridge he was a wonderful guy. And he would just be so pleased that the program has kept going and that you're doing such a good job at it, having so much fun. You know, I'm just overwhelmed with your description of this trip and the way you got along so well. And it's just absolutely wonderful. And I was so blessed to. Oh, go ahead.
How many canoes did you have on the trip? I'm not sure if I.
First trip, I think we had about 18 people, something like that. In the 406 group, and then there was probably another 12 or 15 in the Troop 488 group.
And do you recognize some of the lakes in your pictures?
Oh yeah. I've been on most of those lakes.
What was the most memorable place up there that you recall, or the most significant story that you can recall on one of your trips?
Probably the first time he got his feet wet.
When they lost the food.
Probably
Yeah,
lost
that's
the
a
food.
big one.
Pretty good.
I wasn't on that trip.
What lake did you lose the food on? Maybe we can go find it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. It was right at the beginning of the trip. Well, I just love the program. You know, I still have that canoe. I bought it in 1950.
Wow.
Still have it.
Wow.
It's
Bless
a lightweight canoe. Only weighs 55 pounds.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But
You still use it because I see you driving around Beaver with it tied on the roof of your truck.
well, you haven't. I was using it up until about 2 years ago. You know, I was able to do pretty much what I wanted to do until about 2 years ago. But I also had a kayak. And I loved that kayak. I was be out on the river a couple 3 days a week on the kayak.
Here's a couple older pictures from a time past. I don't know if you know any of these people, but these are
He
some.
might be one of those people.
That's what I was wondering. So, this is
Where did these come from?
where someone dropped them off. Do you know that kid?
Gee, this might have been pre-Canoe Trails, because that's a little wooden canvas canoe there.
Mm-hmm.
A wooden canoe. Wow.
Wooden canvas.
Canvas.
Wooden frame with the canvas. My dad had one when I was a kid.
Of course.
They were heavy, like carrying a car. They were very heavy.
Get your shoes out, boy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're wooden canoes.
I think that's Paul Pettit.
People we saw last year and this year. The ones we saw last year.
Yeah, we went out to see those girls.
Yeah, it is.
They were wooden
I'm
canoes.
just wondering, well, on that first trip, we had some aluminum canoes, and we also had to rent some wooden canvas.
Yeah. So these could be around that time frame, right?
Yeah, that could be in the early 50s.
Mr. Lloyd, were you ever on a trip that went to Algonquin Park?
I was.
What years did they do that? I can remember my dad was on one of those trips and told me stories about that.
The first trip was Kippewa, started right from the dock, and then it was 1951. I came back in 1953, and we went to Algonquin that year. And I remember we took off Algonquin and took a canoe trip. And then on the way back, we got picked up by a train. We came back by train. That was 53.
Wow.
What year did Raven's Rest start being used?
1980. Because in 78, when Andy and I started, we were using the schoolhouse at Hunters Point.
Yeah.
Take the launch out.
And they had 2 launches that we put all the canoes on the roof. They were big boats. We'd buy our provisions at the Kippewa Supply, right there at the dock. Cunningham's owned it. And then we would repackage our food on the boat, right? Which was, were you guys, were they done with the launches? You guys came after Raven's Rest.
Yeah, they're.
We used to, it was a 2.5-hour ride by boat to get from Kippewa to Hunters Point. And we would have to waterproof our, you know that whole thing we do downstairs that's so chaotic? We had to do that on the launch, riding out to Hunters Point.
In 2 hours.
And, yeah, 2.5. And
That
you
was-
get there and eat lunch and get in the canoes and take off. And there was a schoolhouse there that was kind of like our base camp. At some point, Jen, didn't Eddie Cunningham and a couple guys buy the schoolhouse at one time? I can't remember exactly what went on there, but
Purchased it, but.
we used that. They did like a mini wider op in 78 at Hunters Point. That was like the pilot program, and then wider op started in 79. And in, I guess at the end of that summer, or the spring of 80.
They called that group the Munchkins, didn't they?
Yeah, in 78. Pam Gardner was one of the Munchkins. So a guy opened up a place that sold beer at Hunters Point. And that's when Mr. Wildman said, we can't be taking all these young girls there and using that as a base camp, right? And all these guys were coming out of the bush in motorboats, drunked up to buy more beer, right? So he just felt, you know, we had to do something else. So he actually took his own money and
Bought Raven's Rest. I don't know how he got the money, but he did.
yeah, I think he may have gotten some donations for that, but that Canoe Trails didn't pay for any of that. That was on him. And, I think it was $30-some thousand at the time,
I think so.
which was a lot of money when it was 80, you know what I mean? So.
Well, in 1970, the launch couldn't get up through Turtle Chute. And so we'd take the launch usually out to Turtle Chute. And then I understand later that they dynamited part of Turtle Chute so the launch could get up there to Hunters Point.
It was always a really tight squeeze.
Yeah.
Eddie drove one, and you remember Jimmy Johnson, I'm sure, always drove the other one.
Yeah.
He was a little tiny guy that was a fur trapper, And
Yeah, I have a video,
trap line
a video
all
turtle
winter,
shooting
and he
under.
drove the launch
Do you?
in the
Yeah,
summer.
yeah.
So it was
They did a
Sean
boat
that
transfer
wrote the
for
story.
him.
Pardon?
They did a boat
Eddie's
transfer
brother-in-law.
at Turtle Shoot
So
for him.
that's-
Oh, really?
After he cut his thumb.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there's a community over there.
Yeah, I know. We had, in fact, John Aiken,
Which is when we were through this winter.
he got a, the last trip we took with the
Yeah,
senior
it
group,
was narrow for the launch.
John got a nosebleed and we couldn't get stopped. And we were camped right up there above Turtle Chute. And there was a cabin there and a motorboat. We got them to take John down to an island just below Turtle Chute.
Breaking the fire down.
And there was a nurse down there, and she treated him. And then he went into the hospital. And that was the last trip, senior trip we went to Canada, around 2000, something like that, I guess. And then part of them started going to the Adirondacks, part of that senior group. And part of us canoed on the Allegheny. We'd come from Kinsu down to Tynesta.
Was George Robbie on some of those trips with you?
Oh, yeah, George, yeah. And John Ruther, remember?
I remember him going
Yeah.
through that.
Yeah.
George Robbie was my dad's scoutmaster.
George was a wonderful guy. You know, George, he was the only one that canoed into waters that flowed in Hudson Bay. And he went over just north of Lake Superior. And it was an old canoe route that they used to get from near Lake Superior up to Hudson Bay. Moosonee, I think, up there. Yeah. And he took that, made that trip with the 423 group.
How many miles was that?
I think it was like, I'm pretty sure it was over 300 miles. But they did it in 2 years. You know, they did half the trip and then came back on the train, and then the next year they went up on the train and did the rest of the trip into the southern part of Hudson Bay. And they had a heck of a time, he said, when they got close to Hudson Bay. It was like a delta. You know, there were just so many different streams, and they couldn't find the right one. Finally, he said he did a lot of praying.
I picked one that works.
Yeah, George is just a wonderful guy. Well, that's the great thing about Canoe Trails. You know, there's so many good people in it, and it started that way, and obviously it's still that way.
We always refer to it as the Canoe Trails family,
Yeah.
and that's the way it feels after a trip. You feel like you have an extended family.
Yeah.
It's now, to this day, I always feel that anyone who's gone through the program is an extended relative. You know, there's a kinship for sure, and it's just something very special.
Yeah, absolutely.
So everyone here is now adopted into the family.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I'm so proud of you guys. You know, it's just wonderful what you're doing.
We have some big boots to fill, so.
Yeah.